In the high-octane world of Formula One, every race weekend is a test of mettle, a battle against time. The recent Suzuka Grand Prix was no exception, especially for Lance Stroll, the Canadian driver for the Silverstone-based Aston Martin team. Despite his car being equipped with aggressive upgrades, which significantly boosted his teammate Alonzo's performance, Stroll's weekend was far from successful. Alonzo, with the same upgrades, managed to secure the sixth position in Sunday's event, leaving both Mercedes drivers and Oscar Piastri in his wake. His qualifying pace was impressive, at one point clocking the second fastest time with the AMR 24. In stark contrast, Stroll's performance was lackluster, raising questions about his future with the team. The stakes are high for Aston Martin, with potential investors showing interest in acquiring a significant stake in the team. The close competition between Aston Martin and Mercedes has been extended to another weekend, thanks to the Suzuka GP. However, one factor seems to be hindering Aston Martin more than anything else: Lance Stroll. Stroll, despite finishing sixth in Australia, has been inconsistent. His performance in Japan was particularly disappointing, with a Q1 exit and failure to score points despite a strategic tire strategy. Currently, he is only 1 point behind Lewis Hamilton, which may seem impressive, but a closer look at the standings reveals a different story. Stroll is at P10 with nearly 3 times fewer points than his teammate Alonzo, who is at P8 with 24 points. Adding to the pressure, young Japanese driver Tsunoda is hot on Stroll's heels in the championship and is considered a serious contender for the Aston Martin seat from 2026 onwards. But more on that later. For Aston Martin to compete effectively against Mercedes, who have found themselves in an unexpected midfield battle, Stroll's driving needs to improve. His qualifying troubles continued into 2024, and he often finds himself with a lot of ground to cover. On tracks like Suzuka, where overtaking is difficult due to the narrowness of the road, this is a significant disadvantage. Even during the final stages of the race, when Stroll was on the soft compound tire, his performance did not improve. In fact, it worked against him, as he was overtaken by Hülkenberg, who was outside of the competitive window compared to Stroll. Aston Martin had its fair share of issues at the end of the 2023 season, but they started the current campaign exactly where they expected. The massive upgrade package they brought to Japan further bolstered their hopes of securing a few podium finishes in 2024 and giving McLaren a run for their money at P3. However, this cannot be achieved with just one driver performing well. Alonzo has been the main point scorer for Aston Martin, and it's clear that the narrative needs to change sooner rather than later. In a 24-race calendar, everything can change in a matter of a couple of races. What's worse for Aston Martin is that while Alonzo had a solid showing in Suzuka, Stroll was not happy with the car's upgrades. When discussing the upgrades, which included a Red Bull-esque side pod design and a new floor, Stroll had nothing positive to say. He stated that while the upgrades looked good on Alonso's car, his own car was very slow. He also mentioned that the straight-line speed of the car was very bad, which was one of the primary reasons why he was awkwardly passed by Hülkenberg. In the early stages of the race, after the Ricciardo Albon crash, it seemed like Stroll had covered enough ground to fight for points or at least grab P10. However, after finishing the race at P12 and with a one-lap deficit to Verstappen, it was clear that there is still a lot of work to be done. If you were to ask Alonso, his words would inspire hope. The Spaniard stated that being just a couple of hundredths of a second away from Sainz and Ferrari, where last year the deficit was 1.5 seconds from pole position, and now it has shifted to 4:10, is a massive boost to the car's performance. However, seeing Stroll get outperformed by Tsunoda, who theoretically and practically has a slower car, is not a sight that Aramco, who are considering buying a greater stake in Aston Martin, wants to see. If they do decide to invest, they might have a request that will definitely disturb Lawrence Stroll, get rid of his son, or put him in another category and make a run for a driver of Sainz's caliber. The lack of motivation in Lance Stroll is more than visible, and if you pay a little more attention to the radio messages he sends to his race engineer, you'll understand that he clearly does not care a lot about this racing seat. This has not hurt him yet due to the massive influence that his father has over the team, but with recent talks about Aramco willing to buy a significant stake in Aston Martin, the situation might change sooner rather than later. Even though Lawrence will still have a great say in who will be driving in the team, it won't be as unanimous as it was until now, and there will be lots of mouths to be shut from Lance's side if he wants to continue with his F1 career. The partnership that is bound to happen between the Silverstone-based squad and the Japanese manufacturer Honda won't come without any consequences for the former side. We all know how Honda treats its drivers. Just look at how much they cared about giving Aomu Wasasa an FP1 drive in Suzuka, and how much they lobbied for Tsunoda to stay in the sport, even though his behavior and driving were quite questionable in the first couple of years. Nevertheless, by outperforming Ricciardo vastly and being the sole point scorer for the Racing Bulls, Tsunoda makes a strong case for himself when it comes to driving in a far more competitive team than what the newly reformed squad currently is. Tsunoda will look at the Aston Martin seat if the one in Red Bull won't be available to him, which, to be fair, after all the statements made by Horner regarding Perez and the outside hire in Carlos Sainz, is very unlikely to go into the hands of Tsunoda or Ricciardo. While this would mean devastating news for the Aussie, it might not be that bad of an opportunity for Tsunoda because, at the end of the day, he can count on Honda's help to vouch for him and the seat in Aston Martin. Even if that is next to Lance Stroll, Alonzo is not going to remain in the sport for a lot more. And even if he does, there is a realistic chance that he will depart from Mercedes, a situation that has taken a bit of a cooling right now, with the Spaniards' focus being on continuing the deal with Aston Martin in the foreseeable future. Still, this does not close the door for Tsunoda, and regardless of how that seat situation turns out, it's safe to assume that Lance Stroll is going to be under immense pressure to keep his seat. The question is, how far will his father go in order to defend his son, and whether or not Lance will finally feel the pressure of having to drive to survive in F1, something that he would have definitely failed had he driven in a team not owned by his father. With all this in mind, do you think that Lance still has a chance to prove himself in the sport? And more importantly, do you think that this could be done without the large influence of his father's financial and management impact on the team? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.